Good morning. It is my privilege to welcome you here today. My name is Andrea Vassalotti, and I'm the Director of Partnerships and Programs at the World Heart Federation. And I'm serving as the Vice Chair of the Fight the Fakes Alliance since its official formation as an independent NGO in December of 2020. Fight the Fakes is a multi-stakeholder nonprofit organization based here in Geneva whose aim is to raise awareness and influence change about the proliferation of substandard and falsified medicines. And just as a note of housekeeping, in addition to those of you who are with us here in the room, we also have a Zoom link. And for those of you who are watching us remotely, we want you to be very much part of the conversation today. So please submit any questions you have or comments through the chat, and we'll deal with them as they come in. And of course, the meeting will be recorded, and the recording will be available to watch on the Fight the Fakes YouTube channel, so be sure to check after the event. I'm really delighted to moderate the discussion today, which is the flagship event of Fight the Fakes Week, the first full week of December each year. And the theme of today's discussion is keeping patients safe, securing the global medicine supply chain. And this is also the 2022 theme of the Fight the Fakes Week. Many thanks to the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and Associations for hosting the event, and to the International Alliance of Patient Organizations for the Patient Solidarity Initiative that we're celebrating today. And I'm truly honored to have a stellar panel with us today, and I'd just like to introduce them to you. With us on the left of the stage is Pernette Bourdillon Esteve, Team Lead Incidents and Substandard Falsified Medicinal Products, Regulation and Safety at the World Health Organization. And we have Shirisha Yadlapalli, Vice President, International Government and Regulatory Affairs at the United States Pharmacopoeia near Washington, D.C. Then we have Stanislav Barro, Global Head of Anti-Falsified Medicines at Novartis. Suzette Cox, Secretary General of the International Generic and Biosimilar Medicines Association. Oksana Pizik, Global Engagement Lead and Lecturer in Global Health at the University College London School of Pharmacy. And Kawaldeep Semi, Chief Executive Officer of the International Alliance of Patient Organizations. Of course, substandard and falsified medicines are not a new problem, and the Fight the Fakes itself has existed as a campaign for almost a decade. And we've seen that fake and substandard medicines appear wherever there's demand for medical products. The COVID-19 pandemic was a striking reminder of that, not only for treatments and vaccines, but also for antibiotics and other healthcare products. Recently, though, we had a medical alert from the World Health Organization of substandard toxic cough syrup in the Gambia, possibly leading to the death of almost 70 children, and potentially more in other countries where the products were sold. Falsified and substandard medicines have no limits. Most of them are said to be antibiotics and antimalarials, but other types have been found as well for cancer, HIV, diabetes, hypertensive, and other treatments. And now I'd like to pass the floor to Kawaldeep to start off, to share with us what, from your point of view or the perspective of IAPO, is the biggest challenge in preventing substandard and falsified medicines from reaching patients.
I think one of our biggest challenge, I think, is that as patients, we have very little control over how drugs are regulated. And we have been suggesting this for longer, that patient engagement in drug regulation is absolutely essential for this very reason. That if we are working with the drug regulators, what is called co-producing the enforcement regimes, we would be in a better place. Patients, as you know, are dealing with something what is called a black box, meaning you're getting a medicine that is prepackaged, we don't know what's in there, and we are ingesting that. Don't have that expertise of knowing what the key ingredients are. So therefore, we have very little control. We would like to have that control at the regulation stage so that we can work together. And then also, I'm glad the industry is here. We would also love to work with the industry at the manufacturing and distribution and supply chain level to ensure that we get that perfect regime we need. We continue to be exposed to high risk from falsified and fake drugs. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. So I'm a pharmacist as well as an academic, and I think one of the biggest challenges still lies around public awareness. Even on the online front, where we're seeing much more falsified medical products and substandard, particularly throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, where many people were pushed online to find supplies or were vulnerable and didn't want to go into pharmacies. And I still think that there is this gap between patients being able to verify legal online pharmacies and those that are illegal, even just understanding which medicines need a prescription, which don't. And pharmacists are really there as the last line of defense before patients receive those medications and take them home with them. And there's a real opportunity there for patient education as part of wider public awareness. And I think one of the strengths of Fight the Fakes Alliance, I mean, even if we just look at the people in the room here today, is that it brings together so many different perspectives. And we really need to utilize that in terms of working together at every step of the supply chain, from the regulator, as we've just heard, all the way down to the patient's hand, to ensure that we are considering where these risks lie and acting appropriately. There's so much more work to be done on this. I think we're going to explore those themes throughout this panel as well. But with my academic hat on, we're also very much in the dark about the scope of the problem because so much of this activity happens underground, and there's just a big research gap that needs to be filled. So a lot of my students, I end up giving research projects on this area to try and also get more information around it. So lots of opportunities to be able to shed more light on how to protect our patients. And again, today's Patient Solidarity Day, so that's the main theme of why we're all here.
So I would like to take two angles. First, from the personal perspective, I believe personally that the biggest challenge is the poverty of patients, which is a barrier to access to quality assured medicines. That's one point. From an organization's perspective, from the IGA perspective, it is, we think that the biggest challenge is the weak healthcare systems, and which includes, of course, the insufficient resourced regulatory system and quality control.
Thank you. From the private sector perspective, I think for us the biggest challenge, probably also the biggest opportunity from an impact perspective, is what it is we can do in relation to timely authentication of falsified medicines. It's actually a very complicated process. Nothing is done visually. I mean, a very tiny percentage of cases we have, you could say visually the product is falsified. Generally speaking, just again to set the stage, all these suspect samples have to be brought to a place where they can be actually properly authenticated and through forensic means. I mean, so when it comes to packaging verification and drug authentication, this process is actually very, very long, far too long actually to protect patient safety. In certain situations, and we'll talk about that, there are incidents nowadays in over 150 countries. I'll share a bit more on this later on during the panel. We need to find solutions basically to leverage digital technologies to localize authentication of falsified medicines to make that timely, cut down these timelines from weeks to basically days, hours if possible, basically, and accelerate the reporting to local authorities or to the WHO, for instance. So for us, that's where we can have the biggest impact, we believe. Thank you.
Thank you, Stan. We are happy to be here from USP on this day. And substandard and falsified medicines can occur throughout the medical supply chain, starting from upstream all the way to downstream. And today, while there are several aspects that we focus on as USP to ensure quality of medicines, to address substandard and falsified drugs, today we'd like to focus on upstream supply chain and essentially the quality of raw materials, which don't get the kind of attention that they should ideally get. So when we have a chance next, I would like to present on behalf of USP certain risks associated with raw materials and why both manufacturers and regulators should focus on the quality of raw materials as well.
Thank you very much. So from WHO's perspective, in the past 10 years, we've been building a structured database of substandard and falsified medical product reports. And this database has basically allowed us to better understand the scope, scale, and harm caused by those products. And it's not very good at extrapolating prevalence, but it's pretty good at giving us qualitative pattern detections. And what we have observed over the time is that there are three main driving forces which correspond to three types of challenges. The first is definitely access, with its key components of affordability, availability, and acceptability. The other one is poor governance, with corruption and unethical practices, as well as procurement practices and administrative systems, which can be more or less efficient, for example, in bringing commodities and data back up to the centralized bit. And the final driving force is weak technical capacity. So there is a lack of capacity in terms of regulatory oversight, both health regulatory oversight, but the other regulatory bodies as well. There's also poor understanding of the issue and not enough tools to implement. So those are the three main challenges and driving forces that we have. And with Andrea's permission, I'd like to take this opportunity to remind the audience that in 2017, WHO and member states have agreed to common definitions of what substandard and falsified medical products are. And standardizing those definitions, having a common understanding was in the past a challenge. And we don't ask member states to change their definitions, but it allows us to have, like an interpreter, speak between different languages. So for us, a substandard product is one that is basically out of specification. It could have degraded after leaving the point of manufacturing, or it could have been poorly manufactured but without any intent. And that's what defines a falsified product, is that there is a deliberate intention to deceive and to misrepresent the product's identity, composition, or source. And the notion of intent is quite important. And we have also defined an unregistered product as one that is essentially not authorized to be distributed in the market by the competent authority. So those elements help us have a common context, which used to be a challenge in the past.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that definition. And I think there's also a lot of, obviously, criminal organizations behind the falsification, and that's something that is difficult for us to address. I would like to obviously, we've talked about the challenges, but to what is a very, very complex issue. And I'd like to ask Pernette to start, to give us her perspective, opening remarks about what the WHO is doing to address the issue of substandard and falsified medicines.
Sorry, I wasn't sure which one was my microphone. So WHO and member states have essentially agreed to a three-pillared holistic strategy, which is prevention, detection, and response. And these three pillars articulate around 12 functions. The majority of those functions fall within the mandate and scope of action of national health regulatory authorities, but not exclusively. We need to be working, because this is a cross-cutting issue, we need to be working with organizations from other walks of life, if I may say. So, of course, the private sector, but also law enforcement agencies. You need to be working with the judiciary. You need to be working with civil society, including, of course, patient associations. So WHO focuses most of its efforts in addressing this issue on the regulatory front. That's the technical response, but we also have a political response, which is called the member state mechanism. It's like a mini World Health Assembly, and the member states here have the opportunity of setting priorities every 2 years. What's really important here is to remember that standards are useful to set quality. It allows us to know what's the playing field, what's the framework of action, because you need to know when you've gone over the line, essentially. And there can be no safety for patients unless you have that quality. So this is a very important element to remember. There's no quality without safety, and prevent, detect, respond. That's WHO's strategy. I almost said over because I'm so used to speaking online. I'm so used to over. It's finished with me. I'm muting myself now.
Okay, so we'll pass over to Shirisha, who will share with us a little deeper view of what USP is doing to address the issue. Not so well.
Thank you. Okay. So we are thrilled to be here on Patient Solidarity Day. And today, USP, we'd like to highlight the impurities and adulterants in raw materials, because patient safety is affected. It begins with suppliers and manufacturers. And raw materials can pose potential health threats when present in manufacturing of APIs or of the final products, and they don't get the attention they need. And today, we hope to show you a little bit more detail on that. The medicine supply chain starts with suppliers. There's significant emphasis on the quality when it comes to manufacturing. There's a lot of emphasis on finished dosage or API quality, but the raw materials that come from suppliers also require that level of focus. And of course, there's safety and quality issues can occur through the supply chain, through wholesalers, distributors, during packaging, during distribution, during storage for temperature control, and so on. And today, we emphasize raw materials. So raw materials, what are they? They could be starting materials, reagents, solvents. They're intended for use in the production of intermediates or APIs. These could include both active as well as inactive ingredients, and they may or may not remain in the final product after the process is completed, after manufacturing is completed. So controlling the quality of these raw materials is as essential to maintaining safety and ensuring consistency across batches as our focus on quality of the final product. Some of these components are more important, and some of these adulterants are more dangerous than others. So we know that there is significant resource constraints across all of the ecosystem. And given that maybe not everything can get the same level of scrutiny, monitoring, and focus, a risk-based approach is what would be ideal, since there is more risky components and more risky adulterants than others. Quality testing, as I said, across the product life cycle has heavily focused on API and final product. And the failures of the raw materials can also cause product failures. These can occur across the supply chain, for various reasons, from manufacturing issues to supplier issues to even lack of regulatory checks.
When we consume medicine to treat an ailment, we assume each component of the drug formulation has been vetted appropriately for quality. The composition of a drug can be broadly divided into two categories: the active pharmaceutical ingredients, or APIs, and the inactive ingredients, also referred to as excipients. Excipients are a major component of almost all drugs, as well as foods and cosmetics. Excipient functions range from helping delivery and bioavailability of the API to the drug product's manufacturability to its texture and taste. In medicines, excipients make up a large portion of the total composition, and its quality influences the overall efficacy of the drug. Excipient quality has historically not been given as much attention as API quality by both drug manufacturers and regulatory agencies. However, with an increasingly complex global supply chain, the identity and quality of excipients cannot be assumed by manufacturers, even with documentation from their suppliers. Many serious human tragedies have happened in the past and continue to occur due to failures in testing for excipient quality. One of the most recent examples of such a tragedy occurred in the state of Jammu and Kashmir in January 2020 in India, where an allegedly mislabeled or untested excipient ingredient present in a cough syrup resulted in the death of 12 children and left many more hospitalized. Thankfully, there has been a significant shift in global mindset concerning quality control of excipients, leading to increased regulatory scrutiny on excipient testing by the US FDA. Between 2017 to 2019, 58 companies worldwide received warning letters from FDA citing deficiencies in excipient testing. This is a significant jump compared to 3 warning letters issued between 2013 to 2016. Learn more about how USP can help with excipient.
So as we said, the supply chains have become increasingly complex, and in the past 2-3 years, if we've learned anything, it's the geopolitical issues, trade issues, significant other issues have really highlighted the complexity of the supply chain and specific raw material related issues. As you can tell, the video is a little dated because it's referring to the Kashmir incident from cough syrup that happened last year. And unfortunately, we all know too well that more recent incidents have happened in Gambia and Indonesia for the similar glycerin and propylene glycol issues. There was also heparin and melamine issues in other parts of the world that have caused, and all these have been highlighted. Public quality standards can help detect adulteration and allow for a rapid response. And these are some of the global impact of what contaminated raw materials have done. I'm not going to go through all of them, but of course the cough syrup incidents recently, the OSCS incident, methanol, melamine, dextromethorphan and methylprednisone across the world in different countries. And these many have resulted in deaths, and these are preventable deaths.
In the fall of 2006, patients began flooding into a hospital in Panama City with a mysterious illness. The doctors knew they had a crisis on their hands, but struggled to find the cause.
In the first 24 hours, there is a sense that this could very well be an infectious disease of epidemic proportions, and that this could have spread to the rest of the population. And it was quite frightening to think that this was going on and that we didn't know what it was. And the relatives were worried because their loved ones were very ill, but they had been living with them in their houses. So who was going to be next? My child, the wife, the mother. So it was uncertainty and fear.
For the panelists, this is a video playing about Panama.
Patients began to die in alarming numbers. Doctors worked frantically around the clock to find the source of the sickness. It was Carlos Umanzor's case that provided the clues to solve the mystery. He'd come in with a heart attack, but developed the same symptoms as the people who were dying.
His kidneys started to fail, then his lungs, his nervous system, and finally he fell into a coma.
The doctors knew it must be something they were giving him. They tested every drug Carlos had been given except a cough syrup. A test revealed it was poison, but it was too late. Carlos and over 21 others had already died.
Then it was like somebody had thrown cold water over me. How are we going to explain this? How are we going to explain to the people that we, the persons that are supposed to be giving help, we have poison the people that we're supposed to be caring for?
Thousands of bottles of this poisonous cough medicine had been unwittingly distributed to the poor and elderly all over Panama via their social security system.
We needed to get back more than 100,000 bottles because that was death that was out there.
This poisonous pipeline stretched halfway across the world to rural China. The toxic ingredient was made by a company called Taixing Glycerin. Taixing appears to be a professional operation with an internet site featuring their headquarters building. But the reality is different. These buildings are the real Taixing. It turns out the high-rise belongs to an unrelated company located more than 100 miles away. Taixing officials simply put the photo on their site to lend credibility to their enterprise.
Taixing Glycerin Factory decided that they could make money by taking a cheap ingredient, which unfortunately happened to be poison, called diethylene glycol, which is an industrial solvent used in antifreeze, and to substitute that for its more expensive chemical cousin, which is glycerin, an ingredient that's safe and commonly used in medicine and food.
The factory was not certified to sell any medical-grade glycerin.
So why were we showing something from 2006? Unfortunately, it's relevant because the exact DEG poisoning happened last year in Kashmir. We made a video and said, let's advocate for excipient quality testing, and we started to share it with industry and other stakeholders. Unfortunately, exactly the same thing happens in Gambia in September this year. And then in October this year, we continue to see similar issue in Indonesia. So this issue is not about one country or one particular bad actor. These are preventable deaths. And as Pernette was referring to, sometimes it's about unintentional substandard product, and sometimes it's intentional falsified products. DEG at some level, at some place in the supply chain, is an intentional addition. But the manufacturer may not know about that particular issue because he just took the supplier's word and certificate of analysis at face value. And that's because raw materials are not being tested when they're accepted from suppliers. So these are preventable deaths, and manufacturers need to really test their raw materials. Regulators should be in place regulations should be put in place requiring testing of these raw materials. And we have supplier verification programs that should be taken seriously by manufacturers, and establish mechanisms for monitoring and for surveillance. Our global public health mission, we at USP have worked over 200 years. We've worked with over 85 countries for strengthening their quality assurance systems across 4 continents. We also have a state-of-the-art lab for full-scale training in Ghana and in India. And we work with over 100 manufacturers to increase the supply of quality assured medicines. essentially, the few messages that we want to leave you with today is that public quality standards apply across the entire supply chain, and a holistic view and risk-based approach are necessary to establish the appropriate quality and regulatory checkpoints all through the supply chain. Standardization of raw materials allows us to control consistency in manufacturing of finished products, and pharmacopoeial standards can provide these tools for compliance with regulatory requirements. And last but not the least, of course, building and funding regulatory capabilities is an essential piece to making all of this successful. USP this past month has pulled together a toolkit, essentially specifically to avoid DEG contamination in cough syrups. We would love for you to share and advocate using your handles. We'll share our information with you over the chat or email, but we have put together all of our tools in one place: USP standards, guidance, informational videos, FDA comments on the topic, and case studies of raw material related incidents. All of this has been put together on one page. We'll share with you. We really request all of you to continue to advocate for this topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Risha. Thank you. Stan?
Yes, thank you. So I'd like to share a few words as well in relation to the industry perspective on role, really, on combating falsified medicines. Just to clarify, my mandate relates to falsified medicines, which we also call basically pharma crime. I think Pernette mentioned about intent. That's exactly what we're talking about. Criminal intent. So I just wanted to clarify that in my preliminary remarks. So first, when it comes to the perspective, just a couple of metrics to set the stage. The Pharmaceutical Security Institute, so we're talking about nearly 50 pharmaceutical companies sharing data in relation to this very topic, reported a 38% increase of incidents between 2016 and 2020. So that's certainly on the upward trend on this. We counted incidents in over 142 countries. So again, I think it's important to remind everyone, basically, it's not only what we've been described for years, an African-only problem. It's basically something we see pretty much everywhere. No region, geography is spared on this one. On 21 was an all-time high in terms of incidents recorded, probably due to COVID. It was certainly driven by a number of categories of products and therapeutic areas, but 21 was by all means a bad year to remember. When it comes to Novartis, the picture is pretty much the same. These are now numbers we disclose officially in our annual report, but basically we've had incidents in every geography. We had incidents for every therapeutic area. On the phenomenon really reaches across various categories. We're talking about falsified medicines, so the fakes, basically maximum patient safety impact. No API, wrong excipients. I mean, I won't go through the whole list, but usually that's terrible news for patients. But there are also other categories that are booming, that have a patient safety impact, that are draining for the healthcare systems, that certainly impact the trust patients have in the system, like illegal diversion, for instance, product theft, tampering. And what we see day in, day out is that all these categories are mixed. We have cases where you find basically everything. So the message I think here is basically whatever this criminal organization can make money with, it doesn't really matter whether, again, it's falsified, tampered, stolen, illegally diverted. It's a bit of everything, quite frankly, with these criminal organizations. Now, in terms of the role, actually, we can have at the private sector, at least I can share Novartis' take on this one. I think for us, it really started with a robust internal governance as well. How important the topic is for us. That's a topic that is discussed often by the executive committee and by the board. That's a level of importance. We do very regular briefings and we engage with them. We get feedback and endorsement on the topic, but that's really at the top level of the company that the matter is discussed. It's part of the company risk strategy as well. So that's within this, what we call risk compass strategy. And that's definitely one of them that is basically prioritized as well. So very important statement. It's a cross-functional effort as well. I have the privilege to lead that effort at the company with a very dedicated team on this from security, but it's coming also from legal, public affairs, manufacturing, and I won't mention everyone because it's quite a long list, but it's a very, very collective effort we have internally to try to make a difference on a topic like this one, and especially at a country level. So there is a governance to start with. Then basically we have also transparency on the topic. I think that has been discussed for years, but it's fair to say the pharma industry was not necessarily very open to discussing the topic a few years ago. I think this is changing a lot. That really has changed a lot over the last few years. To only speak about the company I represent, we make this data basically available. It's part of our annual report. It's part of our position. We have a position on Novartis.com basically on this very topic. So we're very transparent on this. We have committed a couple of years ago to voluntarily report every single case, confirmed case to WHO. That's a great relationship, and I think that's working very positively in that regard. So I think in the collaboration space, and I hope we will be able to touch on that during the Q&A, on the public-private partnership, that's a very decisive sector for us to be impactful. And then it comes to the priorities for us, and I briefly touched on this. I think for the private sector, where we believe we can make a difference, at least Novartis, we decided on that a couple of years ago. There are three main topics. So I mentioned the first one is basically authentication. That's the biggest frustration for us. How can we accelerate the authentication? It's a lot more complicated than what people might think. Basically, authentication is a very complex process. And authorities need to know what that is, you know. It's you can't have the full story. You can test a packaging. I'll just give you a couple of examples. The packaging could be genuine. Inside, it could still be a falsified medicines. We've seen that many times over. So packaging testing is just not the solution. We've seen the other way around as well. Sometimes we only have drugs with blisters. We don't have any secondary packaging. So you need to be able to test a drug basically to confirm what that is as well. We've had cases where everything is mixed up, as I mentioned to you, stolen, illegally diverted, and falsified basically, fake medicines. A stolen drug remains basically a drug manufactured by us. It shouldn't go to patients, could be expired as well, but at the end of the day, in terms of authentication, it's a lot more complex until we get to that stage. So for us, has been really a decisive factor is how can we progress on timely authentication by bringing latest technologies, digital technologies to a country level. Because when you have incidents in 150 countries, having one lab in one country will not be a solution, really. It's not effective. It's taking weeks, if not months. Authorities are reluctant sometimes for suspect samples to travel or to even release samples. So you need to bring that to a country level. Reporting is a second one, is being timely in reporting to local authorities, to the WHO, so that they can do their work as well. Local authorities is health authorities and law enforcement. They need to know what we know as quickly as possible so that they can act on it, and we work with them on this. On the third point I mentioned, which basically captures the first two, is strategic alliances, public-private partnership. And I think that's probably what you're going to hear from us for the coming hour and a half that we've left, is nobody has a solution, and one of us is going to have to be through collective work, collective action here. So we work very closely with law enforcement, with health authorities, intergovernmental organizations, and I hope during the Q&A we can elaborate a bit on that, because that's really a space to watch, and that's where I believe we can have the greatest impact. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm representing here the International Generic and Biosimilar Medicines Association, which represents the global generic and biosimilar medicines industry. But I would like to stress that we represent regional and national association, not individual companies. Nevertheless, the companies of our membership, they offer up to 80% of quality assured medicines around the world, which is, of course, a lot. Now, in the fight against falsified medicines, I think what is important is that patients get access to quality assured medicines, timely access to affordable and quality assured medicines. So the role of generic and biosimilar medicines is to introduce competition and thereby reducing drastically the prices and therefore increase access. Now, however, we also know that most countries around the world do not have proper regulatory systems in place and also not proper competition policies in place or just not existent. So the whole issue is about access. How do the companies get access to those markets? But if they have the marketing authorization, what are the policies in place so that they can play the role to make the medicines affordable? So we are a very new member of Fight the Fix. We just joined, and we are very delighted to partner with all the members of Fight the Fix Alliance and see what we can contribute to this alliance and strengthen it and discuss all the issues together with all our partners. Thank you.
So there we go. Well, I speak loud anyway, so that's part of the day job. UCL Fight the Fakes was the first academic partner of the Fight the Fakes Alliance. Since then, we have grown to have King's College Fight the Fakes, Butler University Fight the Fakes, Warsaw Medical University, New Giza University in Egypt, Kenya University, and hopefully growing wider. And this is really important in terms of getting that not only awareness building, advocacy building, but also because these are our future pharmacists, and we want our pharmacists day one to understand how to report falsified or substandard medical products, to have these conversations with their patients about, this term health literacy. But we also now need to talk about online health literacy. Where are you getting your medications from? Are you sure that it's verified? And ensuring that they're not getting it from unwittingly these illegal sites, which are all over social media. And really, we don't have that tech sector regulation that's caught up to be able to respond to that appropriately. And recently, I was at the meeting of the Alliance of Safe Online Pharmacies in Washington, D.C., and that group is really working closely with members of Congress so that even just simple solutions like making sure that domain names that include pharmacy are only available for legitimate pharmacies. There's also been on a more global stage the political declaration of the Lome Initiative to help criminalize falsified people who engage in selling falsified medical products. And that will also require greater global harmonization. Returning back to just this idea of having this conversation with our patients, they are the experts. Right? Patients are experts on their own medicines too. So when it starts to crumble differently, if it has a strange sense or smell, that's at least a very basic rudimentary response where then they are educated to be able to raise that concern with the appropriate people. Now, of course, we need very high level screening, authentication, and also there are now many different types of personal authentication devices, but how well do they work? How well is that sector being regulated as well? We've also been really, through WHO, FIP, International Pharmaceutical Federation, working on developing pharmacy curricula for pharmacy students, not only in high-income countries, but specifically partnering with universities in Uganda, Senegal, Cameroon, Tanzania, Nigeria, so that we can share our knowledge and make sure, again, that is not only for pharmacists, but we're hoping to also expand that curriculum for other healthcare professionals, because that needs to be on the radar and even amongst healthcare professionals, it's low. Healthcare professionals are often late to report any falsified or substandard medical products, and often once many people have been affected. So at least one action that academia, educators, trainers can take is to ensure that we're getting that response rate higher by providing this type of training. So that's one, I think, excellent example of WHO working with FIP, Commonwealth Pharmacists Association, and academics. Again, I've mentioned earlier that there's a big research gap that still also needs to, I think, progress to ensure that we better understand some of, again, the access issues in terms of what models we can be using to ensure that universal health coverage, the really driving platform of what Dr. Tedros has been pushing, you don't have UHC if you don't have access to quality and safe, affordable medicines. So all of these aspects are interconnected, and it's been really interesting to be able to hear the perspectives of everyone and how they're working to help alleviate this global burden and where those needs still lie. And it looks really, there's still, unfortunately, a lot of work to be done with that regard.
Thank you very much. I think I'll start off with the reason why we're marking what we call Patient Solidarity Day. Patient Solidarity Day started in Kenya with Maurice Moses Foundation, where a family experienced enormous patient harm situation, and they had to go through lots of hoops to find out what exactly had happened to the child. We held on to this as a way of getting together. I think they found out that if patients got together, they would be able to make greater changes and bring those changes about in health systems. Over the years since 2014, we have been marking various aspects about access, about clinical safety, surgical safety, and this post-pandemic, I think this is why we said, let's go back to the basics. And the basics is let's take out all avoidable harm. And one of the biggest avoidable harm is fake drugs. I think that's where we want to begin with. Let's clean the front line of these fake drugs, because those are the things we can't control ourselves. It's unlike you purchasing an Apple phone. You can open it up and you can see the seals and etc. Even if you prise it open, you can see the components and you can relatively easily assess whether this is falsified or not. But with drugs, because the chemical formula, we can't analyze those. We don't know. So therefore, it's better to have it zero tolerance towards that. I think I like the bit about the pharmacopoeia and others were saying. At the moment, the world is treating fake drugs very lightly. We have either in legal perspectives, this is jurisprudence has to be improved. We're either putting this as a commercial crime, or we're then putting it as a product liability into negligence or tort law. Or then mild criminal here, the fraud and that. But nobody is putting this in the category of homicide. This should be elevated to the homicide branch, whereby your intention there is to bodily harm someone. Whether this bodily harm causes that death, you shouldn't be hiding behind manslaughter or other. You had intention there to provide something you very well knew was harm. So it should be elevated to that criminal element, to homicide. That I think that would clean out the process something. So that's something that we have to look at. In many countries where such approaches have been taken, there we've seen the market soon clear up. They are treating falsified drugs in the same way as narcotics, whether you're handling it, financing it, or distributing it, or whatever you're doing, you'll be handled or treated by the law in that same category. There is no room for tolerance in this. This is a despicable crime for us. The last element here again is that I'm now in parallel sessions. After this, I return back to this global experts consultation that WHO is carrying on the post-pandemic and global patient safety action plan. What should we be doing to be pandemic prepared? And one of the things we found out was that During the pandemic, when there was a rush on analgesics and other medicines, the shelves emptied, the prices shot up, and that made it really profitable for fake drugs to come in. And the pandemic was used as a vehicle to bring in lots of drugs. And I think that those criminal gangs are still there, those networks are there. And those of certain age know that Watergate scandal where Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, the two journalists, were trying to find out what was going on. And they were just given one simple lesson: follow the money. This is what we should be doing. This is dirty money. This dirty money on Monday will be selling arms and ammunitions to a country. The profits of that will be invested in taking out ivory, teak, or environmental damage. That same money, the profits from that will then turn into narcotics. And then somewhere along the line, human trafficking, and then return back. And somebody says, oh, let's put it into falsified fake drugs. That's the same money, same distributors, whether it's a Hawala banking system or whatever, it's the same issue. So we must look at that from that criminal intent and criminal perspectives, because as patients, we have got very little control. And we understand that the regulators can only do so much. If there's criminal intent, there is very little pharma can do unless rely on the police and the criminal law. We are good at controlling our factories and everything, but we can't control our ports. That's where things happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Kawaldeep. Thank you, Kawaldeep. Very important point that much of this damage is motivated by financial gain. So now I would like to enter into the more specific panel discussion and address a specific question to each of our panelists. And I'd like to begin with Pernette. Regulating medicinal products or medical products is very closely linked to sovereignty. How can the World Health Organization encourage member states to take the issue seriously in their country?
Thank you, Andrea. So we live in a globalized world, right? So political and geographical borders are often crossed every day by commodities, by money, by data, by people, by pathogens. And so we need a global system. And that's why WHO and member states have agreed on this prevent, detect, response strategy that I was mentioning earlier, which is predominantly under the sphere of influence of health regulatory authorities. But not only, and I'd like to take this opportunity to go back to what some of my colleagues on the panel were saying. So there are 12 functions, and I'm not going to take you through those 12, but there are some which I can highlight in terms of supra functions. So under prevention, the first thing that we do is we encourage everyone to demand quality. And all the stakeholders involved in the supply chain must demand quality at all levels. This includes any manufacturer of API, of excipients, of the raw chemical ingredients. They have to know how to, and they have to apply and exert due diligence. So making sure that a certificate of analysis has not been forged, has not been falsified. That's one example. But also at the patient level, making sure that there is awareness that you have to procure products from safe and reliable sources. Do not purchase medicines from an open air market. Do not purchase medicines or vaccines from an unauthorized, illegal, unregistered website. So all the stakeholders of the supply chain have got to demand quality. Once that is done, you've got to secure the supply. So securing supply means that you've got to ensure that what is actually in the supply chain stays safe in the sense that it does not deteriorate, it does not degrade to become substandard. So for example, containers should not be left out in the border, in the harbor, in the full sun for 6 weeks whilst you're waiting for importation authorization processes. And you've got to be able to detect that degradation, because authentication techniques are very important, but often they will give you kind of binary, yes or no. They won't tell you that it's degraded to 80% or 50%. And traceability is really, really important. So all the techniques that Stan was mentioning about are essential. And traceability is important because that will then allow you to have effective recalls. So you all mentioned the diethylene glycol cases. When you have the active pharmaceutical ingredient that has got the quality defect, recalling all the finished products that have got this active pharmaceutical ingredient is a nightmare. Because you will have different manufacturers, different batch numbers, different markets. A manufacturer does not always know sometimes all the countries and all the markets where the product that they've manufactured is being sold, because you've got brokers, distributors, resellers, etc. So that's for the prevent side. And you can see where the regulators can have a key role there. Under the detect side, you have to be able to detect better. And once it's detected, you have to report. And it's almost a call to action. If you don't report, there's no problem. No report, no problem. So patients have to report any unexpected adverse reactions to their physician, to their healthcare professional. There is an overlap with pharmacovigilance, but that's okay. At the end of the day, we're talking about patient safety. And once it's been reported, you have to be able to transmit that information to the appropriate authorities. So we know that supply chain of commodities are complex. Supply chain of data is complex as well, and that needs to be followed through. And then you get to the response part, and the response part, the first thing you have to do is safeguard the public. So healthcare authorities will focus on safeguarding the public health aspect of things, keeping the patient safe. But they are not the only authorities. The role of any governmental and public authority is to keep the public safe. So law enforcement will focus more on the security aspect. Judiciary will focus more on the systemic aspect. So we've got to work together cross-cuttingly to safeguard the public. And then you have to document what you've done well, what you could have improved, so that you can prevent recurrence. And then you get back into the cycle of prevention. So regulation is, of course, within a national sovereign role, and it is market control is a core regulatory function that must be applied. It's one of the WHO key indicators of the global benchmarking system, but you have to work with other stakeholders because you cannot do everything on your own, either at a national level or at a regional level. So that's why WHO acts as a global level. We provide, key information sharing services. When you have an issue in Pakistan, you put the people in touch in Paraguay. There are no problems between those two countries. It's just easier to have an interpreter, literally, between the two. And so at national level, you have to work between the different stakeholders, and at regional level, you can have regional regulatory authorities that can help this. You've got to be able to rely on the regulatory expertise of other member states. So that's called regulatory alliance, and it's a key component, is a key strategy from WHO in making this possible. Standards are important. WHO has got the pre-qualification program. This is essentially about authorizing certain products, saying that these products conform to certain standards of quality. It's a service that WHO also provides. And all of these are different forms of regulation. And you can do regulation at a national level, at a regional level, or at a global level. But you have to be able to share the workload. We're all overworked, I'm sure, especially at the end of the period. We're all seeing all the things that we have to finish, all the projects. And it's nice to have a little bit of help from someone else. So share the information, share the workload, rely on each other. And really, maybe the key message is trust. Trust is at the heart of everything. Patients have to trust that the product they are getting is of the appropriate quality and safety. Otherwise, there's no point taking it. As you've said, Oksana, it's been developed, it's been made available, it's been made affordable sometimes, even with, financing programs. But if the version that they're getting at the end of the day is not of the appropriate quality and safety, there's no point. You've just wasted a lot of money. And not only have you wasted money, you've undermined the confidence of the public in the systems. And gaining confidence of the public, once you've lost it, is very difficult. Think back to the COVID pandemic, making sure that people trusted the vaccines. Vaccine acceptability is a key point. If then you tell them, oh yeah, we've got a problem because the vaccines we distributed were falsified, how are you going to get them back onto the vaccination roll? So trust is essential. And I would say for WHO and regulation, what's important to note is that regulatory authorities, they play a key role in shaping and executing, applying policies that ensure access to quality and safe medical products. And trust determines all of that. You know, if they don't do their work well, the public will not trust them. And if the public don't trust them, there's no point in regulating all those medical products. Over.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Pernette. I'd like to ask Sharita to provide her perspective on what specific actions should manufacturers and governments take to ensure the quality of raw materials used in medicines.
Thank you. Manufacturers, I think, have to start with supplier verification. They need to have an audit system in place to make sure the suppliers are verified. This is not done very commonly, but must become an automatic audit system in place. They also should be testing all of the quality of raw materials that are incoming into the manufacturing process. Testing of raw materials isn't, again, necessarily done as a mandatory aspect as the APIs and final product. So incoming raw material testing becomes one of the key ways in which to control substandard or falsified material. Investing in quality tools goes without saying, but also I think understanding the manufacturing process to eliminate impurities that may arise during the process. We've heard a lot about nitrosamine impurities lately, but there are other forms of impurities too. And understanding the manufacturing process and investing in it is key. And adequately protecting their supply chain from potential adulteration. So they know where upstream and downstream their product is going to. So Stan mentioned many things that Novartis does for its own, how do you protect against this particular adulteration process? Then regulators, on the other hand, have their own role to play. Not very many countries have regulations in place for ensuring quality of raw materials. They have regulations for APIs and finished doses, but not necessarily for raw materials. Some countries do. We saw in the video that FDA has issued more comments lately in just the past few years compared to 3 years ago in how much they are citing quality concerns related to raw material, but not all regulators have put in regulations in place, and that's the first step that regulators can do. And in terms of enforcing that, then the investment into strengthening their health systems, including quality control labs and the ability of the quality control labs to detect. Not all of them have tremendous resources, which is totally understood, and therefore the risk-based approach to which materials and which particular contaminants are more dangerous and how do you do post-market surveillance, put post-market surveillance in place from a risk-based approach standpoint. And then lastly, and other panelists have touched upon this, the penalties for this should be much higher and should be enforced by regulators to really act as a deterrent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sirisha. So Stan, Novartis has issued a position on falsified medicines that contains a battle cry: digitalize, localize, standardize to accelerate the detection of falsified medicines. How can public-private partnerships contribute to the cause and keep fake and substandard medicines from reaching patients?
So public-private partnership have always been at the heart of the strategy for us. Again, it's cross-functional in the first place, but it's also a multi-pronged approach with many stakeholders. So we always say, if we do it, let's not do it alone. We wouldn't be effective otherwise. There are 3 areas where we believe are really critical in this. So the first one, we talked about it, public awareness. And I still believe that's an area where we're not doing well enough. collectively or individually. I'll mention the other two, but I think on this one particularly, we need to bring that more to the markets where that matters. I don't think we're so good at that at the moment. And we need targeted awareness as well for the public. Because they're not impacted in the same way everywhere. I'll give you an example. If you take Africa, I think basically you're back to anti-infectives, antibiotics. A big problem is lack of reporting, because the lines between legitimate supply chain and the unregulated one or the illicit one are a bit blurry in a number of geographies. So it's very specific. If you go to the US, it's a totally different problem, basically. So you can't just have the same level of awareness and communication for patients as well. But underreporting is definitely an issue. If we know about things, if the regulators do, basically we'll be a lot more decisive on this. At the moment, underreporting remains a problem. The second one is capacity building. And I differentiate that because capacity building, we're talking about stakeholders who do have an active role to play in this effort, basically. So we're talking about law enforcement, we're talking about health authorities, for instance. We could be talking about pharmacists. I see them at the first line of defense again, and I think it's a untapped community at the moment in terms of engagement. There's been a lot of progress in recent years, but I think we should rely a lot more on pharmacists, especially in certain geographies where they pretty much use as much as a doctor, really, in many places for many patients. Capacity building, we, the private sector, need to empower these stakeholders a lot more. And it's a sort of a two-way street as well. We need things from them, they need things from us. It's a very active collaboration. So our commitment to these stakeholders, first of all, is sharing of intelligence. We've been very active with a number of intergovernmental organizations. To mention the well-known ones, you have Interpol, Europol, World Customs Organization. I won't mention everyone at a country level, but we do that day in, day out. And that goes both ways now in certain countries. So we're very pleased about that level of collaboration. Intelligence sharing is good, but then training is absolutely critical. We're a very complex, basically, industry. So for healthcare professionals, that's fine. For law enforcement, we have to understand for police and customs, it's extremely complex to be very effective in their work when you start touching medicines, basically between the therapeutic areas, the name, the different categories as well. It's actually very challenging. So we're really trying to make an effort to make that easier for them to do their job. And I think we have a lot more work to do on that front as well. So that's for the capacity building part. And then finally, the third one is policy and advocacy. There are many ways to look at that, and there are many partners. I think, first of all, we need to focus on promoting effective tools. I could mention the Medicram Convention. There is a UNODC legislative guideline as well, which is very interesting. There are actually, sorry, talking about the Medicram Convention, quite an entrance. Good to see you. But yes, we're trying to really promote these tools actually to be effective. There are tools at a country level to promote for better regulations, more deterrent legislation as well against organized crime. That's a given. So we keep pushing for that. Now, there are forums as well for this sort of work. There are some very good stakeholders we've been working with over the years. I could mention the OECD Task Force on Illicit Trade as well, which is a true public-private partnership. We've done a lot of policy work with them, best practices sharing. A number of UN bodies as well are developing work programs now on illicit trade. It's great news. They have memberships of 150, 190 countries, depending on the entity. That's perfect. That's where we need to start from, developing policy work as well to be more effective on that front. So I think these three are the three pillars for us for public-private partnerships, where we want to focus on have impact and collaborate. If I could just conclude on one concern, it's a risk of dilution of a plurality of initiatives with no concerted effort as well. And we start seeing a bit of that. So I'll just put it out there, and maybe we'll have a chance for a bit of a discussion to share perspective. Just to make sure we don't reinvent the wheel, there is not too much overlap across initiatives, because we see a bit of that. we need to concentrate on focus or efforts as well to have the greatest impact. So I just wanted to mention that point as well to conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, Stan. And Suzette, you mentioned earlier in your opening remarks that the IGBA represents organizations or associations providing up to 80% of quality assured medicines globally. So that's a huge proportion. So how can your organization act to support quality in low and middle income countries?
Yeah, thank you for this very important question. So first, I would like to reiterate again that IGBA has zero tolerance for substandard and falsified medicines, and that's our reason why we joined Fight the Fix Alliance and strengthen it. Now, from the patient perspective, what is important is that patients get access to affordable quality assured medicines. I think we are all on the same line. Now, what we as IGBA do is to work on the market barriers for our industries, and there are many. I will just concentrate on the regulatory angle because that's one which we have WHO also here. We are very much, well, first, there are no harmonization of standards. That's also a very important point which we don't mention very often. We have experts within ICH, I think about 56 right now, contributing to the discussion, international harmonization on standards. We are, of course, working actively with WHO since years, and we have the non-state actor now since January, which, of course, accelerates our collaboration with WHO. We'd also like to see a framework, an international framework on single global development possibilities, but this is not yet. Also, we discussed that already since many, many years. We would like to work on that and continue to work on that. But for the moment, there are regional harmonizations, which we also support. The best example, of course, is Europe in that sense, but it was also a long way to get there. Then we are participating now, for example, at the McKinsey interviews on the 5-year plan of the WHO, which ends in 2023, which is a plan to build effective and efficient regulatory systems, which is, of course, a very important assessment. And then we work on that, on lessons learned from that process. And I think that's probably something which can take up in our workshop over the next 2 days, how we can contribute to that. Then there is the other very important point is that we support collaborative reliance models in regulatory affairs. I think next week there is the WHO annual meeting on collaborative procedures. There are, of course, 2 angles. Of course, from the regulator side, we would like to see much more countries participating in those collaborative models. But also we encourage industry to participate in the pre-qualification process, procedures, and then the follow-on CRP, the collaborative regulatory procedure. And then the other one, which is a very important one, which is good for the whole industry, and then getting access to getting registered products of quality assured medicines, which is a regulatory process on that you get a national approval based on an approval of by a stringent regulatory authority, which is the so-called SAA-CRP. We all have these acronyms which are difficult for the laypersons, but which we use a lot. So again, there will be discussion again next week how we can collaborate on that and how we can improve that, because it's all about getting access to quality assured medicines so that they can compete and drive out the falsified and substandard products. And then last but not least, certainly we need a harmonized and uniform approach of quality testing and control. So we try to work on many other aspects, of course, also on market barriers itself, on policies, competition policies, but I will not expand on that now.
Thank you very much, Suzette. And Oksana, of course, you've been instrumental in integrating education and awareness of falsified and substandard medicines into the UCL School of Pharmacy curriculum. Can you tell us more about the role of the pharmacist in protecting patients from the damage of fake and substandard medicines?
Yeah, sure, thanks. I think I maybe jumped the gun and got into this a little bit early, but really pharmacists are the experts on medicines, and they work at every step of the supply chain as well. The problem is that in many parts of the world, healthcare workers, pharmacists and others are in short supply, and that makes it very difficult, as well as regulatory bodies being very underfunded, not having enough resource to really do their job effectively. And then that also adds to the burden. So there is only so much pharmacists can do, depending on where they are placed in the world, but we are working, at least from the education aspect, to be able to identify, detect, report. And as Pernette highlighted, this is a key aspect around prevention. But we're really just going to be a leaking barrel because we might supply that, but if they can't deliver on it, then there needs to be more investment in that area. And that's where all sectors need to come together and find just more effective solutions, because I'm worried that we're looking sometimes at just Band-Aid approaches. Now, awareness is critical. This is important from a political perspective as well, because sometimes underreporting can be politically inconvenient. So we need to empower those groups to ensure that if they are coming forward, that they're doing so in a supported setting. And that can be difficult. So that's where, again, at a very high level, we need to be looking at the most effective mechanisms for responding to where the problems lie. And in this instance, we see that there are certain regions where it is certainly more problematic than others, where there is also corruption, et cetera. And that's something that we can't totally ignore or minimize. It's part of the problem, but that does not mean that we don't try and address it. I think sometimes that style of argument could be a reason for people to say, well, we're not going to bother. That's exact opposite. That means we need to concentrate even more on developing the appropriate systems in that area. So it goes far beyond pharmacy. It goes into other healthcare professions, but it also goes to the very top. We're talking about political will and also ensuring that there is transparency in how these tools are being used as well. So I'll hand it over to our Kawaldi.
Okay, thank you so much, Oksana. And Kawaldi, what can governments and healthcare professionals do to gain patient trust, which obviously Oksana mentioned?
I think I'll start from the top, and I think Neda, Chair, will cover this. All the governments are investing in universal health coverage. We've got another 7.5 years to go to 2030 when all this needs to be put into place. Now, if you're making such heavy investment in universal health coverage, then that old European proverb comes into mind that for the want of a nail, the shoe was lost. For the want of a shoe, the horse was lost. And for the want of a horse, a knight was lost. And for the want of a knight, the battle was lost. So if you're going to invest in universal health coverage, why undermine it with this tiny nail problem? Get rid of fake drugs, because our universal health coverage has no time in correcting mistakes, poisonings as you saw now here and others. These are extra costs we can't bear. Universal health coverage should be sleek and that. Second, governments are restructuring their health systems. We are transferring a lot from acute and into primary healthcare. I think this is again with primary healthcare we're talking, and Neda will probably address that as well. If you're going to invest a lot into primary healthcare, where the level of facilities, for instance, rural hospitals, frontline hospitals, clinics, and those are not equipped with these high-flying labs. In a hospital, acute setting, the moment there's a rumor of a fake drug, you can immediately check it out, and you've got labs. but up in the rural front you can't, where sometimes there's also danger that some of the health professionals may not have a central supply chain secure. They may be resorting to purchasing locally from local suppliers in so we need to look at that also. So governments need to make sure that this is happening. Then health professionals as a whole, I think we're very glad that we've got health professionals here and across with our on our several alliances. One of the alliances we have the African Medicines Agency Treaty Alliance, where health professional bodies are part of us, plus the manufacturers, plus the regulators and others. We're looking at strengthening the regulatory effect through combined all stakeholder response, a unified response. We should co-produce this new regime that I see of regulation and fight the fakes. That we don't have time for this because we've got other things to do, and build back better system means that. Thank you.
Collaboration is really key. That's clear. So thank you very much. I would like to proceed to the next part of our program, where we'd like to open the Q&A. So for questions from those on the phone and from those in the room. So maybe we'll pass around the microphone to those of you who would like to ask a question. So please raise your hand and maybe just introduce yourself by stating your name and the organization or group you represent. Any questions? Do we have any questions online, Natra? Okay. Maybe as we're waiting to, yes, please.
Just one question and remark to this wonderful panel. First, I have a better remark to the Kavaldip about the intention to kill. Actually, I don't think these people have the intention to kill, because you don't usually kill your clientele, you know. You want the business to go. You want to sell your fakes, you know. So it's rather a negligence, ignorance, stupidity, whatever, but they really don't want to kill, because if you're in the counterfeit or falsified medicines business, you want your business to flourish. So you don't really want to kill anybody. So it's a bit a bypass product and unfortunate, but not really intention. I like more your analogy about the punishment and the criminal offense compared to the narcotics, which I think is very much linked to the other murky businesses, and I think it's quite good and appropriate. And what was Pernette saying about the strengthening regulatory authorities, I think WHO has now also a system of the benchmarking of regulatory authorities. And what I wanted to ask from Pernette is there anything specific provisions in this benchmarking that are more focusing to how these regulatory authorities, when they are assessed for the maturity or level of the operations in different areas, is there some specific angle also trying to figure out how good they are in the work of fighting fake medicines?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Lambert, for that question. Before I answer, I'll just react on your comment on criminal negligence. I think that is very important. What is difficult with substandard and falsified medical products is that they are by nature difficult to detect. Substandard products, well, they've been manufactured by the stated manufacturer, and it's only probably once they've caused a problem, even sometimes lack of therapeutic efficacy, that you realize something's wrong. And even then, you do not always question the product itself. Let's say you have a headache and the ibuprofen you've taken doesn't have any active ingredient. Maybe the headache went away because you just drank a little bit more water, or you're fine. Of course, if you wake up in the middle of an operating table because the propofol only had 50%, that's a bit more delicate, and you have antimicrobial resistance, etc. So criminal negligence, I think, is important, and this is where it shows how health authorities focus on safeguarding the public health aspect, and then we pass the baby on to the law enforcement and the judiciary authorities. And just one last point, there was a case a few years ago in Indonesia where there were falsified vaccines. They had refilled empty vials of vaccines with essentially what was saline solution. And in order to avoid any infection at the site of inoculation, injection, there was a small amount of antibiotic in those vials. And this was precisely to avoid detection. So here, this is a classic case of a falsified product, but it's just to illustrate Lembit's point that you want to make sure your clients stay alive. It's like with the drug business at the moment with the fentanyl. Overdosing the fentanyl is probably not a good long-term investment strategy. With regards to the global benchmarking tool, so WHO has developed this system which basically ranks and rates regulatory authorities on their maturity level. And there are 4 levels, 1 being the lowest and 4 being the most mature. There are, if I'm not mistaken, 5 or 6 major family of indicators, for example, market control, vigilance, laboratory, etc. And there are indicators, sub-indicators, which are specific to substandard and falsified medical products in those different families, specifically on market control and vigilance. There are about 12 indicators which specifically mention substandard and falsified, and there are maybe up to 100 which indirectly refer to substandard and falsified. And that's very important. Some of them, for example, mentioned the importance of having a reporting system in place. This has been alluded to by different members of the panel at different points. There are all sorts of reporting barriers depending on who reports to whom. A patient might be shy about reporting to their pharmacist or to their physician. Am I going to go and back and bother Dr. So-and-so because da-da-da? Maybe I'm the one who didn't adhere to the treatment. Maybe the antibiotic didn't work because I've got a resistant strain. So first of all, identifying the problem and getting it detected at that level is difficult. And when we are talking at systemic national government levels, I can tell you there are huge barriers in terms of reputational damage. A lot of member states are still concerned, unfortunately, that reporting to WHO about substandard and falsified medical products is actually a negative reflection of their regulatory capacities. It's not. On the contrary, it demonstrates that they have the capacity to detect, which is not easy. We've heard it from Stan, we've heard it from others, and they have the capacity to transmit that information. There are entire economic areas which are built on information sharing. WhatsApp, Microsoft, it's not easy information sharing. So being able to report it and to detect it is actually a very good indicator. Sometimes I have people who come from the outside and tell me, shouldn't a decrease in the number of reports show that the country is doing better? And I say, quite frankly, if I haven't seen any regulatory measures that could explain why there is a decrease in reporting, I'm not sure. You should be able to measure reports in terms of frequency, in terms of regularity, in terms of distribution across the different therapeutic areas. So reporting systems are included in the global benchmarking tool and as part of the indicators, but there are other indicators which are specific to this, and it's a very important one. And just maybe also to get the ball rolling as well, in the past years, we've received more reports from the private sector, from manufacturers as well. And this has been of extreme use to us. You need to have reports from the different stakeholders who work in this area because you would not have a full, complete picture otherwise. So working with media monitoring systems, working with the private sector, working with patients who might detect that something's a little bit odd. For example, a diabetes patient tends to know exactly what they have eaten at what time of the day. And if maybe their diabetes product is not working, maybe it's not them. It's I'm the problem. It's like a bad breakup. So yeah, just maybe if I can roll the ball as well, maybe to Stan as well on reporting issues, if you can share your 2 pence on.
No, I think reporting is absolutely critical. Nothing on either side we can do if we don't know about the case. So that goes for us. I mean, like any pharma company, We have dedicated patient safety and pharmacovigilance teams, so they receive adverse events. Then you have to define what may trigger a suspect case for falsified medicines. In itself, that's not necessarily easy and obvious, but that's where we start the work, or what comes to us basically from local authorities who need our help as well on this. But basically, whatever angle you take the problem from, reporting is at the very basis of the work we do. The other part basically is something we would generate ourselves. We do a lot of market monitoring as well by ourselves on the internet. We actually haven't talked yet about the internet. I think probably would be interesting to spend a few minutes on that. But on the internet, on high-risk markets as well. But it's a lot to cover. It's a lot of countries. You can't be everywhere. So it's also very important to raise awareness across patients, basically to make sure that whenever they feel something is suspicious or not right, they report it, and authorities as well do the same. On the private sector has definitely to play its role. If we start building this virtuous circle, really, where everybody starts reporting cases, we're going to get a much bigger momentum on cracking down on falsified medicines, I believe.
Just to also highlight the importance of awareness of healthcare professionals and detection, there was the work, I think Michael Dietz was involved, Paul Newton, et cetera, on a report where falsified diazepam that was used to help alleviate febrile seizures in malaria patients, where actually the diazepam wasn't diazepam. They dumped haloperidol, which is an antipsychotic, into the diazepam bottles, even though in this instance, that's the clinical guidelines are a separate discussion to be had about the use of that, but it is one way people use what is available in low resource settings. And because again, just the symptoms didn't add up about why so many children were having such bizarre reactions that were really side effects of the antipsychotic, and that it took again, almost mass poisoning of a large group of children to be able to identify what we need to do a tox screen here, because this just clinically doesn't make sense. And also having that awareness that, is this product really what it says it is, led towards the identification that this diazepam was falsified. They just slapped on a new label. And that's again the importance of healthcare professionals in reporting and detection.
Could I just to say to Lambert and others, I think this is, I met Sir Richard Dole on his 99th birthday in London, and he was saying when they came up with the report, smoking kills. This is what the response of the tobacco industry was, that we don't want our customers to die, but we always accept natural wastage and uptake. So this is what we would like to bring into this point, that there's no intention to kill, but we know the product kills. So it's something that we always have to be careful on. Smoking kills was the same attention was there. And lastly, I think from a point of view of collective effort, I think it's very important that we combine now. Please join our networks. I think Neda will also talk about our Geneva-based IAPO Patients for Patient Safety Observatory and others, and other alliances that we have. We're working at the Framework Convention on Global Health Alliance, which is looking at these things, correcting the faults that are there in international health regulation, and making sure that disclosure isn't punished like South Africa did with the variant D. It don't happen again. Thank you.
Thank you, Kawaldeep. We do have a few questions from our online audience, so I'd like the first one of which is directed to you, Kawaldeep. So capacity building was mentioned multiple times as a key aspect, and successful projects were mentioned on educating the health workforce, namely pharmacists, as key healthcare professionals with direct access to patients. How about the general public? Could you share any latest strategies focused on educating patients on the threats of fake meds, as well as strengthening patient safety? How can we all contribute?
I think one we found we are part of the Association of Safe Online Pharmacies, and they were saying that one of the things that many governments have taken on board is they've done campaigns about purchasing your meds safely. Because the problem is very big in the United States, where up to 60% of the meds are purchased online sometimes, and it's having a big problem. So governments there have invested heavily in that, buying from known reputational bodies like the .pharmacy accredited sites. So the governments are now coming up to it. It's like any other public health problem, I think. It presents in a new shape every now and then, and governments have to go into that health education. We have seen that happening repeatedly. And I think the other, we have seen examples is where East African community and then possibly SADC have closed borders to this now. They're working collectively. So it has to be regional and local, and that's where it will go. And government has to now invest in this, making online trading and purchasing safe.
Yeah, but I think too, we're also seeing that, Fight the Fakes, obviously Fight the Fakes Week is an awareness campaign, but very important. It's really at the heart of everything. I'd like to ask a question.
Thank you very much. Thanks for a very insightful panel. My name is Arnaud Bernard. I'm the head of health security solution at a company by the name of SIGPA. SIGPA is a provider of technology solutions, digital and physical, in support of eliminating, countering fake drugs. But I was also, before being at SIGPA for 7 years at the World Economic Forum, in charge of the health and healthcare activities. It so happens that with 3 or 4 partners of the forum, we have managed to convince the folks at the World Economic Forum to actually have the topic on the agenda of next Davos. So that's going to be there. It's going to happen on the Friday. It's not going to be a public session. It's going to be a work session. And the theme is pretty much like you discussed before, Stan, is how do we operationalize a public-private partnership? The same way the forum has been capable of catalyzing the same discussion when it launched a Global Fund or Gavi or CEPI in the past. So the idea is actually how do we build a pre-competitive alliance, not non-for-profit. We named it the Drug Security Innovation Center, by the way. And with 3 remits, actually. One, about increasing forensic capacities in countries, mostly so in Africa, because those national labs, they are totally saturated. And it takes a long time before you get to test the drugs. So how do we pool resources in support of increasing forensic testing capacity? Point number 1. Point number 2, the web. Can we build something based on AI and that is capable of mining the dark web and actually exchange between those partners what is being found? And point number 3 is increasing the number of effective tools that are being used in the field for authentication. And we've seen experiments like the mini labs being funded by the Gates Foundation, but it's not being used. And so it's not being used because it's too complex to use. So can we actually use the DSIC as an incubation platform to actually bring in the field cheap screening devices that actually are not going to have the legitimacy of full chemical analysis when it comes to being in front of a judge, but at a minimum will help guide the more suspicious samples to the national labs. So that's the 3 topics we want to discuss in Davos. We already have 4 or 5 partners that are being lined up. I cannot name them because I don't have permission from them. But if you have an interest, I would be very much happy to tell you more and get you in there. Thank you.
I'll be brief, Stan, so that you can also answer. Thank you very much, and I certainly would be interested in having a little bit more information. Just very briefly, the political aspect of WHO's response to this issue is the member state mechanism that I mentioned briefly before. And there is a working group that was working specifically on detection devices. There's a difference, of course, between the technologies, such as near-infrared or Raman, and the different types of devices. WHO is working on different projects. We're also working on having a common library in terms of like a public good, so that, for example, the spectrum that has been produced by a near-infrared based device can be read, for example, by a Raman-based device. So you're pooling data and you're moving forward. I think what's very important is that you need a round peg for a round hole. The Minilab works very well in certain settings. Other products will not work well in other settings. I've seen some very expensive detection device sit on a shelf and just gather dust because updating the library, the reference library, has been costly and just simply impossible. So you've got an initial cost and then you've got a maintenance cost that for different devices, so round pegs for round holes. And you might want to, you've got field-based devices and you've got benchtop devices, almost like in a lab. And so, for example, a customs officer could be trained to use a specific type of device and would be more suited to using a specific type of device as compared to a semi-qualified or a fully qualified lab professional. So that's very important. And yeah, so I'll be brief. I'll pass over to Stan and definitely would like more information.
Some funding and in support of WHO, by the way. It needs to be in support of WHO. Absolutely no discussion. Now, running a challenge for having a screening device, I mean a global challenge, like it has been run by the Trinity College and on COVID tools. No, running a challenge with a target to enable in the field deployment of a screening device that would help detection or at least screening for a cost of less than $5 a test would be the challenge we would set.
Yes. Yeah, and I agree briefly, again, critical topic, timely detection, authentication. I really see it as number one if we want to be more effective. I can only share what we're trying to do, at least we've been trying to do for the last 3 years at Novartis. So we're into a technology right now, on to fast forward and skip the last 3 years of development. We're planning to roll out to, at the moment, 75 countries, 250 spectrometric sensors. It's pocket size, it's mobile, it's got a battery of a few hours, it's mobile enabled. It does a test in about 3 minutes. We did 2 years of proof of concept testing in about a dozen countries, 93% accuracy rate on solids. So basically, and I'll be more than happy to share more as we go. I knew that wouldn't be necessarily the stage for that. But basically, it's as simple as you take a blister, you put it on it, you activate your app, and 2 minutes later, based on your library development, and I think Pernette touched on that, that's a tricky part, definitely. If you have a solid library, then the test takes 2 minutes, and then we can tell you if it's a Novartis product or if it's not. And we're starting with this. It's not a solution, it's not a global one, but first of all, we wanted to demonstrate we can scale this up and we can bring authentication, timely authentication at a country level. And we want to do that at a company level to start with, but that's a journey where we would like to, the next stage for us is to try to open this up and see what are the options to develop standards on things that work for everyone. Because Pernette mentioned it, there are many, many challenges depending on the therapeutic area, liquids, solids, and whatnot. So it's a beginning of a solution, and that's something we'd like to discuss more when we go live in May. But again, we strongly believe we need to bring authentication capabilities, timely ones, at a country level. That's absolutely necessary. Thank you.
Sorry. When you have a device of that nature, why is that we cannot start pooling inspection services? So rather than going into one pharmacy to test a Novartis product, why not do that also for if the library is going to...
It's definitely the library element that makes it quite complex.
Absolutely.
And that takes a bigger discussion, but it's a start, it's a journey. I think we need to embark on that, but library is definitely a big discussion we need to have.
But we also need quantification, because it's not only about the fakes, it's also about the substandard.
Yes.
So I think spectrometry is.
Yes, true.
So spectrometry is going to be only part of the
That's
answer.
what this library does. It really tells you for a fact.
I
Yes.
know there are a few more questions, but I wanted to also share some of the online questions. There's a comment from Tuomas Kanas, who we know well, the Finnish Anti-Counterfeiting Association. Should or could some synergies be found with global SF food and beverage initiatives, companies and organization, health and safety effect? Bad actors are not industry or brand loyal.
The food safety regulations have predated the medicines regulation, and they have very interesting mechanisms. And some of the mechanisms that I find most interesting in the food safety world are actually about their information sharing mechanisms, how their networks communicate with one another whenever there is a food safety alert, and how indeed they detect things. And I just also like to bring the attention, there's a parallel piece of work that's being done by Oxford University, the FOREFSA project, which is forensic analysis of falsified medical products and their links to AMR. We're involved in that, and it has brought food safety specialists, it's brought in environmental specialists for their own work. So there are many, 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 many fascinating projects, and certainly lunch will be interesting.
Okay, I know there's one more question here. I think we'll take one last question before we proceed to the next part of our program.
Thank you. I'm Lembe Trago from the Council for the International Organizations of Medical Sciences, and actually I was 16 years in WHO dealing with this area, so I have some very bad experiences indeed, because there was a lot of talk, and really in some cases it is very difficult to achieve on the ground something really moving. There is a lot of good things that have happened since, and there is a lot of more good things happening now. But there are still some very basics, and I think all these nice detection technologies and things, I'm sometimes getting a bit emotional, because in some of the countries, they have no national quality control lab that could be respected or is functioning properly. Now, how you want to, if you want to be legally a democratic country, you want to take it into the court, you have to have a national reference lab of at least doing something. And it's not there, you know. That's one of the very big problems. And again, WHO has a program of trying to build up the capacities of the national quality control labs, but it's underfunded. It should be much more supported. Second is also what's happening on the real life is that I was in one country, which is a very fairly big country in Asia, and they were proud about the quality control analysis they did in the country per year. And I was proud about them, except one little fact. The results were better than in average in Europe or Northern America. And everybody knows this country has terrific problems with quality and fake medicines. So how come you can have so good results? And that's where the problem is, because the inspectors in many countries, they don't go to the dangerous places, because believe me, it's life-threatening. You don't go there because you are not a policeman. So it's very difficult to go in where the real bad things are. So what you do instead, you go to the good guys, and you do the sampling of good guys. And of course, then you get a nice statistics, you know, which Pernette said is not bad to present to WHO. Say, well, fantastic, we did so many analyses, they were all. And then another snag is that even if they do this, and even if they document it, even if it's everything is fine, then you ask, what was the consequence? What they could do afterwards? And again, in many cases, it's the follow-up actions afterwards, even if it's a documented case, can be sometimes very mild. That you can see sometimes they try to take action, but then it somehow disappears because the system is not capable or willing to take really action. Oh, there I remember there was a case in Kenya where the counterfeit or fake, whatever you call it, you know, it's fake, you know, I like this terminology business because even old terminology enabled to work, but somehow we didn't work. So now we have new definitions. Hopefully it works better. The problem was it was detected, the local authorities were involved, but then the local authority person called and said, I'm not cooperating anymore because I got a phone call and they said, we know where your kids go to the school, you know. That's the country level real situation. And of course, this means that the cooperation after this type of things, and eventually there was no taking anybody to the court, because I would say there was this, what is the problem of poor governance, yeah? And that's one of the biggest challenges is really poor governance. Sometimes not only in poor countries. Thank you.
Thank you. May I suggest that we answer that over lunch? I'd like simply to just address one of the online questions, and then we'll proceed to the next part of our program. We have a question from Khalid Garba Mohammed, who asks, thank you for this hot topic discussion. Please, we have data that suggests high number of fake substandard anti-malarial tablet formulations from northwestern Nigeria after sampling and quality evaluation in the lab. Please, how do we engage international organizations such as Fight the Fakes Alliance to make this a national survey and to amplify the message to national governments and even the international community? There are serious cases of anti-malaria resistance lately, which could be related to this. Suzette, is that something that you could address? No.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think first of all, it's true. From the place described on the therapeutic area, absolutely. I think it's a fair statement. Comes back the reporting part. I'm not sure what this source or intel comes from, basically, but generally speaking, what we've seen is under-reporting. That's a problem. We have to go out there and find this intel or incidents by yourselves or a number of entities. It's problematic. Then it's engaging with local authorities. Once again, only them have the power to do something about it whenever they have this intel. So first they need to get the report, but then obviously they need to build capacity and be active on the topic as well. On private sector can support, again, you know, with sharing of intelligence, capacity building, we discussed all of that, but that's definitely one of the countries or areas where it's critical. Anti-infectives, anti-malarials particularly, yes, it fuels antimicrobial resistance. I think it's Dr. Tedros who basically said recently, again, it's fanning the flames of antimicrobial resistance, his own words. So yes, we need to do a lot more, especially in this area. But it's not only in Nigeria, quite frankly. I could mention quite a number of countries in that situation. Yes, I don't know if Pernette, you want to add it? Yes.
Well, also, again, depending on what organization this individual is from, to also do directly get in touch with Fight the Fakes, because it is a platform to amplify individual voices. People have been affected. So whether that's individual or at an organization that's trying to tackle those problems, of course, you know, there has to be a stand, highlighted verification, but really that's what we're here for with Fight the Fakes Alliance, is to amplify these stories and cases and bring it to the attention of key decision makers that can do something about it, whether that's well, on some levels, it's much more dangerous problem that don't have quick fixes, but on other levels, even just ensuring that we have better technologies in use, as we've heard from other guests in the audience today. So absolutely, I would say reach out, share your stories, and once we are able to verify them, we'll put them up on the platform for everyone else to hear about these issues and struggles, and hopefully by that, we have a ripple effect in terms of influencing and pressuring policymakers to take this huge issue so seriously.
Great. So, Habib, please be in touch.
Just, it's important for WHO here. Again, I don't know who this person is, but I would encourage this person to get in touch with their national regulatory authorities. In Nigeria, it's NAFDAC. I'm happy to give them the contact of the appropriate person within NAFDAC, because regulatory, if they have detected substandard or falsified medical products, they have to be able to report it. So remember, detect, report, and then protect. WHO is also available to help to validate information, but we have to validate the source as well. That's it's important that this person gets in touch with the national regulatory authorities, NAFDAC.
I just want to say that I think the multiple drug-resistant malaria, TB, and antimicrobial resistance should be put into the same box with fight the fakes. I think that's what we should be doing, because that is a silent pandemic we are growing. It's a lot more than just single drug. It's a long-term issue. It's the silent pandemic we're looking. Second, I think I must say that Lambert is retired, and I think having joined him on CIOMS on that patient involvement in the development, regulation, and safe use of medicines, guidelines and things, please let's bring back Lambert. Let's engage with them, and let's produce another guideline on this issue of patient involvement in the front line of regulating fakes, controlling them, and that. I think that guideline is so good. Please access that guideline. It was so comprehensive. I sat on it hours on end looking at this problem. It was like an elephant. They walked 20 times around it to define it. So let's bring back Lambert. And I think for Suzette, I think we're doing something. We'd like to work with you on biosimilars, because I think they're going to be tainted by this whole mess. Already the European regulators that issued a letter trying to say these are safe. There's a threat that that might be tainted as well. We don't want biosimilars to be tainted. Thank you.
So we're reaching the conclusion of our event, and I would like to invite each of you to deliver some concluding remarks. Kawaldip, would you like to start?
Yes, I think please mark Patient Solidarity Day with the fullest concern over medication safety. You learned the lessons today. Please, we were hoping that things were safe. We normally had walks and events. I recommend, please make your fingers walk this time. Email as many people as you can. Write, blog, whatever you want to do. Make sure that your message gets across, that patient medications safety is an issue that we must look at together. It's part of the same continuum. And be safe. Let's be pandemic prepared and prepare for next year. Thank you.
I'll keep it short and sweet because we've got, I think, very soon a lunch break. But I'd really just like to thank everyone for participating today, for the comments from our audience, which have been very also engaging, and also that there's opportunity for us to all work together. So we're here today on Patient Solidarity Day to fight the fakes. And it really does take many different perspectives as well as specialties to be able to address some of these, as we've heard, incredibly complex problems to detect and protect the supply chain. So really just a call to action to come join us at Fight the Fakes.
Suzette?
And I think what's very, very clear here, that is, it is a collective responsibility, and therefore we really have to have work together, collaborate, coordinate, and everything which is done in a way that it is patient-centric.
Stan?
Lots of great initiative, we said, in awareness, capacity building, policy, enforcement. So again, not to cover all of this again. I think now we're at a time where we need to build momentum, consolidate. I think we can leverage some of this. Everybody has a different expertise. I'd love to see that coming under one roof, really, and make sure, again, there's no duplication, don't loss of impact, really. So that would be really my hope for the coming year. Thank you.
Thank you. We've heard so many different things that still need to be done and can be done, that we need to collaborate, and it can all be a little bit overwhelming unless we take it one step at a time. So my ask of the audience today and the panelists today is, we have a QR code we're going to pass around, my colleague Mike. And we'd like you to click on it, take a picture, or basically share on your social media handles the DEG toolkit that USP has developed, because even if one manufacturer can use it to prevent a cough syrup death, it'd be worth it. So this is one tiny bit of everything that we can do, but this specific issue we took up as a sudden project this past month to come up with a toolkit, because it is heart-wrenching to see the same issue happen over and over again across continents, and it's completely preventable. As a mother, if I picture giving a cough syrup to a child who just has a cold and that leading to a death, it's just heart-wrenching. So it will keep happening until we really address it at multiple levels. So your step, tiny step today, please share and advocate for this as widely as possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we all have a role to play in the prevent, detect, respond approach. Regulatory authorities need to be strengthened, and if you don't report, there's no problem. So please report, report, report.
Yes, and I'd like to share, I mean, it's been such a rich and complex discussion, but really we're very privileged to have this as our flagship event for the Fight the Fakes Week. And obviously we know that global and national standards and frameworks are at the heart of attacking this issue. But what's become, I think, out of this discussion is really that consciousness, okay, awareness, but more consciousness. As a patient, I see something that looks dodgy. I see something that's not right. I need to report it. I need to keep the chain of communication open. Regulatory authorities, we don't need to feel ashamed. We need to report, because reporting means identifying and preventing this, death toll that Shirisha just mentioned, which is completely unacceptable. And I think because that reporting is so important, we need to really develop the consciousness of whistleblowing to this, because it is whistleblowing. It is often criminal activity that is behind this. So let's continue that, and I think it will be great food for thought for Fight the Fakes Alliance to deepen our communications efforts in that sense. And now I'd really like to thank all of the speakers and the audience, both the online audience and those of you who are with us here in the room today, for your attention. And of course to the IFPMA for hosting this event and for resourcing the event and getting it pulled together in very short order. Of course to IAPO for the initiative of Patient Solidarity Day, and also to the United States Pharmacopoeia, who traveled with their representatives here from the United States and really leaned in on the issue. So thank you to all of you. And I'd like now to pass the floor to Kawaldeep and to his colleague Neda Milevska, who is the board vice chair at the International Alliance of Patient Organizations and president of the IAPO P4PS Observatory.
We've got, well, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I think we were given the honor to invite you to the next part, which is the lunch dedicated to the Patient Solidarity Day. I think, Kawaldeep, maybe you can say more about the day.
Okay, let me correct, Neda is our chair, so, so things move very fast, so Neda is a chair. So we invite you to have lunch with us. The reason for the lunch is several. It's quite selfish of us in one way. We didn't even disclose to the rest of the organizers. The Global Ministerial Patient Safety Summit will be happening next year in about February in Montreux, across the other side of the lake. So we are now appealing to you people of the lake on this side. Let's gather again there and bring the same issue on the table there. We will have a captive audience. All the ministers will be there. You can't get a better high-level meeting than that. So that's number one. The second, I think we have got Universal Health Coverage Day coming up on 12th. We would like you to participate in that as well. Bring that forward. Something more important is our IAPO's Patients for Patient Safety Observatory here in Geneva would like to undertake some more research into AMR resistance, looking at issues of patient safety as well, fight the fakes, and something with biosimilars as well. We would like to take that forward to make sure we protect this. And lastly, I think on that one day, Neda always says is, we will all be patients one day. So let's mark that now. We trade in future options. When you're a patient, join us as a future patient, past patient, we don't mind. But please join us for this lunch. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaldeep. I actually forgot to introduce myself, so I'm Neda Milevska-Kostova, currently serving as a chair, otherwise a wife of a patient who suffered a medical error, not exactly the medication, but still touches our lives every day. And I think every patient deserves to know in advance, because there are things we can prevent, we heard here. And by background, I'm a pharmacist, public health specialist. I really believe pharmacists can do much more. We need to push ourselves to do more. But then again, I also think we mentioned here that we have, just coming back to the Patient Solidarity Day at the end of this short speech, I think we said that it is everyone's responsibility. It's a shared responsibility, I agree. But I'm glad that you mentioned that patients need to be involved, because the majority or the most of the consequences are actually borne by the patients at the end of the day, regardless of how much we share the responsibilities. So we need to put them into the equation. And sometimes I have a difficulty to place patients in the public-private partnerships, whether we are public or we are private. So maybe we add another P in there and we say public-private patient partnership. And I would really, really wish to see more, because I think we all shared some visions and wishes. I really wish to see patients being really meaningfully involved, including in the WHO. We are starting. It's a very difficult process. In other, with the industry, with academia, we have collaboration, but we really need to bring more of that. And the Patient Solidarity Day we will be celebrating today is actually a good example, because it started from something very nascent at the very local level in 2011, and it led by specific movements to the actually a declaration of the World Patient Safety Day by WHO. So it means that patients can exert pressure. They can, because they really have a big interest. They have a stake in that. So let's try to find a way in which we not only mark them or not only collect data from them, but try to bring them on the same table, if at all, and as much as possible. So I would like to congratulate everyone for the Patient for the Patient Solidarity Day. Maybe we go for lunch after Kavaldeep maybe has...
Just one touch. We have another high-level opportunity to advocate, and I think this is the Global Patients Congress. We aim to hold it this year to coincide with the World Health Assembly, 2 days before that, so that we can all gather ourselves. And I would really love to promote this idea of fight the fakes, to be getting that accreditation, and that let's gather once again at the World Health Assembly as well, bring the same side event there and work together and attend it. It will be free for all. I mean, we don't charge anything for that visits. Thank you.
Thank you. So the buffet is open outside the room, and we look forward to continuing our informal exchanges over lunch. Thank you.